Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important topic, ending combined sewer overflows. The time is now. Next slide. Our agenda is pretty short. We're going to try to move as quickly as we can. A lot to cover and want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. Please do hold your questions till the end. Feel free to submit them along the way in the chat, though, and we'll be getting to them at the end. And then, of course, as always, please do mute yourself in the meantime. So we're going to cover some quick background on combined sewer overflows, or CSOs. What the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority is proposing in terms of addressing them. Myths versus facts. There's been quite a few myths being circulated, so we want to clarify those. And then most importantly, what you can do. Next slide, please. Your speakers tonight are myself, Emily Norton. I'm the Executive Director of CRWA. Andy Hersina, who is the Water Quality Program Manager for the Mystic River Watershed Association, and then Julie Wood, the Climate Resilience Director for Charles River Watershed Association. And I'll kick us off. The public has been promised clean, healthy rivers for a long time. The last beach in the Charles closed in 1949. 1972 was a big milestone, the Clean Water Act that promised fishable, swimmable rivers by 1983. In 1995, the EPA Clean Charles Initiative promised a swimmable Charles by 2005. And then most recently, last year, the governor's biodiversity plan had a goal of significantly reducing or eliminating combined sewer overflows. So there have been decades of promises to the public, and it's time to meet those promises. You're gonna hear us use the term long-term control plan. Wanted to give some definition to that. So basically, in the Clean Water Act, there's a requirement that affected communities established what's called a long-term control plan to reduce or eliminate CSOs. They set targets for pollution reduction in terms of number of activations, so number of discharges, and the volume of sewage in those discharges. Progress is monitored by modeling system conditions during a hypothetical typical year. And we're going to be defining that later because that's a really important point. Just so you're aware, the original Boston Harbor lawsuit is still ongoing. And we are engaged in that to the extent we're able. We tried to, both Mystic and CRWA filed recently to become parties to that case. That was denied. So we're working with Conservation Law Foundation. But just so you're aware, that lawsuit is still ongoing. And the goals under the last long-term control plan have not been met and are being actively challenged. The draft long-term control plan that we're going to be talking about that was released in April by the parties, which are the MWRA, the cities of Cambridge and the cities of Somerville, dictate the next 30 plus years of control, I was supposed to say. And they recommend a future level of control, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So it can be, the terminology can be a little bit confusing, but just wanted to simplify that. This is an environmental justice issue. For those who've seen our webinars before, we worked with Nathan Sanders, who is a Harvard researcher who has demonstrated very clearly that in Massachusetts, areas with more limited English speakers, with higher poverty, with more non-white residents, are much more likely to experience combined sewer overflows. Why? Why do we have CSOs? Long-term participants in these have seen these before, but for those who are new, back in the day when Boston was first developed, Cambridge was first developed, and we were moving beyond outhouses and chamber pots, it was a really big deal to have pipes laid in the ground to capture stormwater. And in those days, it also had sewage, if you think about how people were transporting with horses. As we continued to evolve and have flush toilets introduced into people's homes, those pipes went straight into the stormwater pipes. And where we still have these discharges are where we still have these combined systems that were in advance in the 1800s, but now is very outdated. So what this means is that when it's dry weather, no problem. You flush your toilet, you wash your clothes, whatever, it all goes to the Deer Island treatment plant. Unfortunately, in rainy weather, and especially in larger storms, which we're having more of thanks to climate change, the rain from the street goes into storm drains into the pipe. You flush your toilet, you wash your clothes, goes into the same pipe, and it's too much. It's too much for that combined system. If we did not let it release into the river, you would have sewage backups into people's homes and businesses and the streets, and that's obviously unacceptable. Next slide, please. What does a separate modern system look like? It looks like this. The water from the street, your stormwater runoff, goes straight into your local water body, which has its own problems. Stormwater pollution is a problem, but it doesn't have sewage in it. And you flush your toilet, you wash your clothes, etc. That all goes to your treatment plant. So that's what a modern system would look like. And our systems look like where they have separated them. So one of the many strategies that you use to address CSOs, if for whatever reason it's very complicated to separate the pipes, is something called green infrastructure. Think your rain garden, bioswale, permeable pavers, any kind of installation that basically replicates nature, either is nature or replicates it, and it sends water into the ground rather than into a storm drain. So reducing the likelihood that you'll have the combined stormwater and sewage problem. In the Charles, this is a map of where we still have these discharges. So for anyone who might be joining upstream, this is not a Watertown, Hopkinton, Medfield issue. It really is a Cambridge and Boston issue. We have these CSO discharges in 9 locations along the main stem, as you can see on this map, and then 1 in the Muddy River in Boston. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy.
Thank you, Emily. Andy Hrisena from the Mystic River Watershed Association. So the equivalent map in the Mystic shows any number of as many as 21 remaining outfalls. The ones that we're concentrating on, though, and the ones that are subject to this round of regulation are the ones in the upper left-hand corner. So if you advance the slide, in particular, the several CSOs along Alewife Brook that goes through Cambridge and Arlington and Somerville and empties into the Mystic River upstream of Medford, affecting, I will say, conditions in Medford as well as other communities downstream. And then the Somerville facility 007A near Assembly Row, that is the other outfall in question in this plan. So if I could have the next slide. So a little more terminology and just sort of as a guide to the options that were investigated and the ones that are sort of on the table in this collective conversation we're having, this public conversation about CSOs. Back to this phrase, level of control. So the teams from the parties that are responsible, MWRA, Somerville, and Cambridge, who were involved in generating proposals for the next long-term control plan, investigated several different so-called levels of control. And they're kind of laid out here. Again, using that notion of typical year, you can think of it as an average year. I'm going to come back to that. But you could say, let's do enough work that would allow some CSOs in a typical year. Or you could be more ambitious and say no CSOs in a typical year. Or you could be more ambitious than that and say no CSOs even in a 5-year that is large rainstorm. And you could be even more ambitious than that and say no CSOs except in a very large rainstorm, a so-called 25-year storm. I realize there's jargon everywhere. A 25-year storm means a storm that is likely to happen. It's of a size, given the current climate, that's likely to happen once every 25 years, and a 5-year storm is one that's so large that it's likely to happen once every 5 years. And you could do something that's arguably the most ambitious plan, which would be to just get rid of the combined sewer systems pipes altogether and to fully eliminate CSOs through sewer separation. So those were the set of options that the engineering teams were sort of tasked with exploring. And if I get to the next slide, what is the plan that they proposed? Where on that spectrum does it fall? Turns out at least in the Charles and in the Mystic, the original proposal on the table in last November was to have some CSOs, again, in that typical year. That plan was rejected even before it got to the planning process because of because of people who spoke out and said, no, wait, that's not acceptable. Our job now is to get rid of CSOs, and you're telling us that you're going to have them even in the average year. You are planning on having continued CSOs. We don't find that acceptable. Constituents of the Charles River watershed, of the Alewife Brook, of Mystic River spoke out and applied political pressure on this process. And the net result was that Mass Department of Environmental Protection said to the planning teams, you have to go back and do a better job. You have to come up with a more ambitious plan. And so the plan they have on the table is at that B level of ambition, no CSOs in the typical year. We think several organizations think that we need to be more ambitious than that, but that's the current plan on the table. And I've got the next slide. So this is just an aside, and again, I'll come back to this too, but just a little deeper dive into this notion of a typical year. When planning teams are assessing how a system this complicated, a big urban infrastructure system will perform in the future, what to expect by way of pollution, they have to not describe every contingency and every possible rain event and how it would perform, but sort of the heuristic is to imagine a set of average conditions. And so and the regulatory language is this language of a typical year. And it's more complicated than just a year with an average amount of total rainfall. So that's kind of one factor that goes into characterizing this year. The real question in this case is, what does the distribution of storms look like across a year? So how many, quarter-inch rainstorms are there? How many half-inch rainstorms, and over what period, and do they overlap? And so the task of coming up with a kind of modeled typical year or average set of conditions kind of includes all those scenarios. So what they do is simulate a year of rainfall that includes all the days, numbered 1 to 365, some with rain, others with not, and plug that input, that precipitation input, into a model, and then ask this hydraulic model how much CSO was released over that period. Okay. So one thing they have done here, and one thing that we as advocates insisted on, is that they use forward-looking planning here. And to their credit, they have done this. They have not asked what's the typical year today, but because we know, and because the planners are all on board with this, that intense precipitation events will increase over the next 30 years and more due to climate change. What will the typical year look like using the best climate models? in 2050. And so when we talk about zero CSOs in a typical year, we're meaning to refer to that typical year in 2050. So stay tuned, more on this to come. And if could have the next slide. So here are the actual plans, and we're not going to spend too much time on this, but we can come back. This is the plan for, you can see for the Mystic River SOM 007A outfall, that is this, the treated CSO outfall on the Mystic River. And the two main components here are an area of Somerville that will, a neighborhood that will have sewer separation where they'll make two distinct sewer networks. And most importantly, this sort of big 7.4 million gallon storage tank at Assembly Row. And the way a lot of all these plans are this mixture of storage and other solutions, where the idea is that when a big rainfall event comes, you, instead of dumping that overflow directly to the river, you store it in a tank and pump it out when it's when the storm is over. So that's the shape of the Mystic plan. If I could have the next slide. The current proposal for Alewife Brook is the following, which is this long green feature in the center of the screen is a long storage tunnel. They're calling it a micro tunnel to contrast with larger options that were considered. And it would store 2.3 million gallons of combined sewer discharge, again, with this idea that you hold it until the storm is over and then send it to the Deer Island plant. And a very small, in the current iteration, a very small area of sewer separation around CAM 001. There are other features, including these storage tanks in other parts of Cambridge. So that's the current proposal for Alewife Brook. And next slide, I'll turn it back to Julie.
Thank you very much, Andy. Yeah, we warned you there was a lot of info to cover. Thank you for all those great technical definitions, Andy. That'll serve us well as we proceed here. The same diagram, but now looking at the Charles River. So with the Charles River, we're really looking at a combination of sewer separation, 80 acres in Cambridge, 366 acres in Back Bay area, and then storage. Some of the storage is small and strategically placed, or varying sizes, but strategically placed around the system to where it makes sense to, as Andy described, hold that water and then release it into the system when there is capacity. Next slide. All right, we are going to get into our myth-busting section. So as Emily alluded to, a lot of the messaging around this has been unfortunately less than fully transparent. So we wanted to just make sure we had the opportunity to tell a fuller story, counteract some of the points that we have been seeing and we have been hearing. And if some of you have been going to the meetings or been involved in the process, you may have been hearing them too. One is the message that is being delivered that CSOs are no big deal. That essentially these are not really a problem and not anything we need to invest in. We strongly disagree with that. Next slide. CSO, combined sewage, contains sewage. What we flush down the toilet.
You mean to suggest that Gail Brewer has a strong opinion on it?
I think we have somebody, hot mic moment. Bound to happen. So combined sewage contains sewage. Flush from the toilet, right down the drain, out to the river. These are things that make you sick. Stormwater, which we're going to talk about next, and which MWRA, Cambridge, and Somerville frequently villainize as the real problem, is a problem. We would never deny that it's not a problem. Stormwater primarily makes the river sick. Sewage is making you and I sick. So it's really something we need to be extra cautious about. Next slide. We're not just making this up. A local study done around the Merrimack found that after combined sewer overflows, emergency room visits increased for gastrointestinal disease, gastrointestinal symptoms. This is not from folks who were necessarily on the water recreating. This is not from folks who were drinking the water. This was from folks living in the area, indicating that perhaps when the sewage gets into the water, it is also getting into the air. That's something we've been talking with partners at Harvard Public Health about investigating right here around the Charles. As I'm guessing everyone on the call knows, these are extremely urban areas. If these pathogens, if these viruses, if these contaminants are becoming airborne, that is a large population that it will impact. Next slide. Stormwater. So the big bad villain of stormwater. Yes, stormwater is a problem. It is a big problem in the Charles, a big problem in the Mystic. Stormwater is permitted already. It essentially has a long-term control plan. What we need now is for combined sewage to have a long-term control plan. So communities in the Charles and the Mystic have a permit that requires them to address stormwater pollution. Communities without combined sewers cannot dump sewage into the river. If sewage is being dumped into the river from a community without a combined sewer system, they have to spend time, money, and resources to find the source of that sewage, track it down until they found it, and address it. Communities in the Charles specifically are investing significant dollars at the rate of 30 million in some communities, 30 million plus, to reduce nutrient pollution. And that is going to drastically improve the condition in the Charles. They're making those investments. We need the same investment. We need analogous investments, I should say, in combined sewer overflows. One other thing to note, stormwater can be addressed very, very well with green stormwater infrastructure. That was something Emily introduced at the beginning. Green stormwater infrastructure uses soil and plants to filter the water, infiltrate it or filter it and send it out to the ocean. These are low-tech technologies that are adequate to treat stormwater as a problem. Sewage, because it is so much more contaminated, does require a higher level of treatment. And that's why we have Deer Island. That's why we have wastewater treatment plants, because sewage is highly contaminated and belongs in wastewater treatment plants to get the proper treatment. Next slide. A big argument, MWRA's analysis that they did to demonstrate that stormwater is the problem instead of combined sewer overflows is, instead of looking at how severe the contamination is, they looked at how frequently it occurs. Well, guess what? It does rain more often than we have combined sewer overflows. So stormwater is much more frequent than combined sewer overflows and combined sewer contamination. But as I've hopefully, nailed over the head one too many times, the contamination from sewage is far more severe. They set the analysis up just to show that whatever is more frequent is the bigger problem. So please, when you see that argument, just have that in your mind. Oh, okay, that's because this analysis is based on frequency, not necessarily severity. CRWA and our partners at Mystic, our community partners, have been pushing back on this argument for a long time. We did eventually get MWRA and the team to look at maximum bacteria impacts in the Charles. And as you can see, those impacts are there. So that's all of that yellow, all of that dark blue. That is all bacteria contamination from combined sewer overflows. So it is absolutely there. Next slide.
Maybe
Andy, I'm handing it
I
back
can
to you.
jump in. Yes. So this is just, while that's all fresh in your mind, another kind of quantitative way to look at exactly what Julie was describing. So these are graphs from MWRA's own data that show the median value at several different locations in Alewife Brook and Mystic River. And the data is pooled into two groups. One is either the day a CSO happened or the 2 days after. And those are shown in red, and in gray are all other days. And so this is just to make the point that water quality in Alewife Brook in particular, there's a red dotted dashed line at the bottom. That is the state threshold for safe swimming recreation. It is true that there's a low level of pollution in Alewife Brook, even when there aren't CSOs. This is just to Julie's point. We do see that signal, even in stormwater alone, without CSOs. But when CSOs happen, the concentrations are not just a little bit higher, they're much, much higher. And that's what that is the same, exactly the same emphasis on the public health threat from, not even twice the concentration, but at any given location, it can be 10 times or more the concentration on those days following a CSO. If you advance the slide by one, please. This is a similar graph that shows, because someone might say, oh, you're comparing days when it isn't raining with days that it is or hasn't rained recently. And this is a graph that just shows that if you just filter all that data, and again, it's MWRA's own data, and say, I'm only going to pick wet days. I'm only going to look at days when it has rained, 0.15 inches in the last 48 hours. Still, on days when there are CSOs, the concentrations are much, much higher. And we think that's highly relevant to public decision making. It's true there are low levels of chronic pollution, but that is no argument for not spending the resources necessary to get rid of these very high levels of pollution that happen with increasing regularity. So if I can have the next slide. So we think those are our responses to the first myth. Dumping untreated and partially treated sewage in the river is a significant source of pollution in the Charles, Mystic, and Alewife. It's a severe public health issue. We can and must address both stormwater and CSOs. And can I have the next slide? So the second myth we wanted to talk about is this potential confusion about what the phrase zero CSOs in a typical year means. And this, the slogan that we will keep coming back to is that zero CSOs in a typical year absolutely does not mean zero CSOs. If I could have the next slide. This is just by way of background, a table showing on the Charles River 2024 CSO volumes and activations, so-called activations, when these went off. And you can see a total of 50 million gallons. Under the current long-term control plan, the total allowable in a typical year, right, that regulatory standard is 13. So this shows that, certainly today, there are CSOs in over a long period of time, or even in a short period of time, that exceed that typical year standard, even though that's the old one, and often exceeded by a lot. So if I can have the next slide. This is a graphic that essentially summarizes the same facts, now looking at for 5 years, the current regulatory target is not even zero CSOs in a typical year, but this sort of 13 million gallons in the Charles. And routinely in recent years, this standard has been violated. So if I can have the next slide. Again, this is a graph to show, and again, I think everyone agrees on this. We're not uncovering something that people are hiding or disagree about. This is the state of the argument, but it's potentially misleading language, and so we really want to correct this. This is MWRA's own a slide from a recent presentation. And again, the message will be 0 CSOs in a typical year does not equal 0 CSOs. So this is a slide where they took, they imagined that their plan, that the one that they have on the table was put in effect.
To the Zoom.
And they said, okay, how much CSO would there have been in the last 10 years if that plan was already in place? If we built it 10 years ago, what would the history have been given how much it rained? And so the red bars are what actually happened in this system without any improvements. And the blue bars show what would have happened in the last 10 years, even if their plan, which remember is 0 CSOs in a typical year, but even a typical year in 2050, the blue bars show what would have happened in Alewife Brook over the last 10 years if that plan was completely put into place. And the takeaway here is that even in the past 10 years, the plan on the table would have resulted in continued regular CSOs in excess of 10 million gallons a year, often, even in this current climate condition. But their own modeling shows that the pressure on this system, their own modeling shows that the red bars would be 2 to 4 times higher if we do nothing in 2050. So I think a natural extrapolation from that is that the blue bars would also be 2 to 4 times higher in 2050. They are not promising, and again, they're clear about this, but they're not promising 0 CSOs. They're promising 0 CSOs only under one scenario, so-called average, typical or average year, but almost, no, by definition, at least half the years will be above average in intensity. And so and sometimes we show you one slide for Alewife or one for the Charles. The same logic applies to all 3 water bodies. So if I can have the next slide. Summary of this particular myth, 0 CSOs does not, in a typical year, does not mean 0 CSOs. We will still have CSOs during larger storms. They talk about large protracted storms of 3 inches. We will also have CSOs in severe, intense thunderstorm-like events where a lot of rain, because it's really the rate at which the rain is falling that best predicts whether a CSO will happen. And CSO elimination is a much higher bar than 0 CSOs in a typical year. A plan to reduce CSOs to a level of CSOs in a 25-year storm was completed in Boston Harbor, and we can do the same for the Charles and the Mystic. So next slide. Back to Julie, I think.
Yes, back to me. Thank you, Andy. So this next myth, honestly, it's a little disappointing that we even feel like we have to address this. There was a public meeting by the parties, again, MWRA, Cambridge, and Somerville, last week to present the plan. And they spent so much of the meeting just characterizing combined sewer overflows as not being a problem. That someone at the end of the meeting, I believe genuinely asked, why should we fix this problem? And the response given was because we have to. So as a river advocate, myself and river lover, and I'm sure many of you on the call as well, that's not the energy, the focus, not the vibes, if you will, that we wish were being brought to this generational opportunity to really fix this problem. So that was an extremely disappointing answer. And we just wanted to take a minute to say there are benefits to ending this problem. It's not a because we have to. There are so many benefits to ending dumping sewage into our rivers. We need to. Next slide. In Philadelphia, they produced something that has not been produced as part of this planning, unfortunately. And that was a triple bottom line assessment of green infrastructure. In Philadelphia, they used a lot of green infrastructure to address their combined sewer overflow problem. If you remember back to the plans Andy and I presented, they really don't include green infrastructure here. So that is a tool that has been pretty much ignored and discarded in this plan, unfortunately. When Philadelphia looked at it holistically, what is the true value of making these investments? Green infrastructure really rose to the top because of all the benefits that they offer in addition to reducing CSOs. So they looked at and quantified things like improved recreational opportunities, reduced heat stress, improved air and water quality, green jobs, energy use, and reduced construction through the use of green infrastructure. So that was a plan looking to solve a problem and invest in their city. Next slide. Just another shout out to green infrastructure in New York City. Very dense environment, certainly as dense or more dense of any of the areas we're talking about here. Also use green infrastructure to manage runoff from the 10% of the impervious surfaces in the combined sewer. I will say that MWRA Cambridge and Somerville are committed to using green infrastructure in areas where they're going to do sewer separation so that they're not sending more polluted stormwater into the rivers. They will add green infrastructure in those areas where they're doing sewer separation, but they have discounted green stormwater infrastructure as a tool for actual combined sewer overflow mitigation. Next slide. Right here in our backyard in Boston Harbor and in the lower parts of the rivers, a lot of improvements have been made, and those have a value, a monetary value. So this report from just a few years ago did an ecosystem services study of the harbor. What was the benefit of the investment of the Boston Harbor cleanup? 30 to 100 billion. That is a good return on investment at a 4.7 billion cost. So again, there is value, both intrinsic and economic value to these cleanup efforts and to these investments. Next slide. One of the things that they did in many of the CSO locations down in or out in the harbor, I should say, southern part of the harbor along the beaches, is they achieved a 25-year storm level of control. It is doable. We have done it here. We've done it in the harbor. We can do it in the rivers. Next slide. Myth busted. Numerous benefits from reducing and eliminating CSOs. We're just not talking about them. We're just not quantifying them. Air and water quality, recreation, tourism, economic investment, human health. Next slide. All right, I think this is one somebody already had a question of. So we'll try to address it as much as we can and then go back in the Q&A. These are expensive projects. These are large capital projects. Think, new Mass Pike, new train station. These are large projects to solve these problems. So they have analogous large price tags. However, MWRA is extremely well run financially. They take that part of their mission very, very seriously, like to keep rates low. They have the ability to bond and pay this over many years, similar to when you get a mortgage. If you buy a house, you pay it back over a long period of time. In the case of MWRA, There's also an opportunity to spread the costs out to the region and to various customers. As we've mentioned a bunch of times, Cambridge and Somerville are also part of the plan, and their ratepayers will also pay a little bit more. Their ratepayers will pay more because their cities are responsible for some of the direct fixes. Next slide. This is for the Mass Water Resources Authority, MWRA, ratepayers. From their analysis, one of the things they have to look at part of this whole long-term control plan process is to look at rate impacts. That first line is letting us know that rates are going to go up no matter what, whether we do no CSO projects or all the CSO projects, the rates will go up. That's essentially how water infrastructure works. It does require maintenance. We do need to fund it. So rates will go up. So that's the $1,003 in total annual cost per household that you see there in the top orange square. The plan that has been recommended by the parties, the no CSOs in a 2050 typical year, which thank you, Andy, will still mean CSOs, has a cost of $1,053 total annual cost per household. What we would like to see, ending the problem, controlling the CSOs, stopping the sewage being dumped in all but the largest of large storm events, is $1,152. An additional $99 per year. Next slide. This is the map of that service area. So I think this includes some just drinking water towns and the central Mass towns, which are not on the sewer system. But you can see it's a fairly large area, 40 plus communities that will contribute to the cleanup and benefit from the environmental improvements. Next slide. So $99 a year for the average MWRA customer. That is a medium iced Dunkin' and a bagel with cream cheese. If you're going large on your iced and you're going egg and cheese, that's way more. Or one cannoli from Mike's Bakeries per month. So these are per month, just to put those costs in a relative perspective. Yes, costs do go up. No one likes to pay more. We're not saying people like to pay for, but let's remember what we're investing in and what we have the opportunity to achieve here with ending sewage dumping into the river. And next slide, I think it's back to Andy for a final myth.
Yes. And so one of the ways we can, collectively decide, is this a good plan? Is how does it compare with other cities? And MWRA has put forward arguments that it compares favorably on certain axes. But I guess we don't agree. Again, if you widen the lens, we can see other contexts where Boston can do more and should do more, and where other cities have led the way. So, MWRA, sorry, not MyRWA, is not comparing its work to cities that invested in fixing the problem and modernizing their infrastructure, like Minneapolis, which achieved remarkable successes largely through very comprehensive sewer separation. So if I could have the next slide. And I'll take this, but then pass it off to the next person. How do we summarize what do we want here? We had a long slide here with many bullets, but we decided to end with just one bullet. We want an end to CSOs, and I'll pass it back to Charles River if they want to expand on that.
Thank you, Andy. Next slide. So what's next? We're in a 5-month public comment period. It's up to DEP, so our state regulators, and US EPA, our federal regulators, to approve this plan from the MWRA in Cambridge and Somerville. They don't have to approve it. They can reject it. It's very, very important that if you care and you want a better plan for our rivers, that you make your voice heard. So we've got a QR code here that you can click on right now. We are also going to be following up with an email with suggested actions to everyone who registered for this. And we have a website, cutthecrapcharles.org, very subtle, where you can go, where you can share with friends and relatives and neighbors who also care. It's very, very important that they hear from a volume of folks. We've also been reaching out to community leadership groups. Yeah, in fact, let's go to the next slide just to remind people that in addition, Mystic also has their own website. So go to mysticriver.org/CSOs. But otherwise, the information is the same. And that is in your own community. We've been reaching out to your elected officials, your boards of health, your concoms. You can reach out to them also, and we'll be providing information to make that very easy. So what they're trying to, when I say they, I mean, when the MWRA in particular, they think that communities beyond Cambridge, Somerville, and Boston don't really care about this, but they're also paying into it. We know from our work, being in these watersheds and having members and supporters and volunteers from well beyond the Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville areas, we know that our residents from beyond care about the Charles, care about the Mystic, care about the Alewife, but we need them to be weighing in. So really anyone you know in the greater Boston area, and you can look at that MWRA map that, again, we're going to be sending these slides out and you can take a look, have folks weigh in. It really does matter. Next slide, please. And you've probably seen our quote unquote cut the crap campaign. We are continuing to get the word out with digital ads and social media and visibility stunts and so forth. We're going to keep doing that. So we're going to be doing that. That takes funds. If you feel strongly about this, please do contribute to both of our organizations, and that will help us be able to expand our reach even further. And with that, we are so grateful that you're here, and we will go to the questions. I also want to give a shout out to Ari Proya from CRWA and Carly Sherman, who is, I believe she was eating dinner, but she's the one moving the slides along. So I'm grateful for their help. So Ari, maybe you could just read some of the chatted slide comments and questions out, and we can respond to them. And then if folks have more, we can address those also.
Yeah, I think we have, Isaiah was doing a great job responding during this presentation, but I think one of the questions maybe
but you know what, let's read all of them for the recording. Yep. So that folks can see what was asked and what was answered, and even the ones that were already answered in the chat.
Yes. So the first question was, how many acres of sewer separation for CAM 401A and Tannery Brook CSOs? And I believe Isaiah responded to, I believe none, just pipes and storage. We can confirm during the section at the end. So I don't know if Andy from MyRWA want to take it.
Yeah, I think the way that conversation went in the chat was that it's 8 acres of separation for Alewife as a whole. But if you're talking specifically about CAM 401A and Tannery Brook, which is one of the Somerville CSOs, that is not, I believe, associated with any sewer separation at all.
And then the next question we had was, who pays for remediation of the CSOs, and are the neighborhoods that are affected have to fix them themselves? I know that was covered in our previous slides that right now for the MWRA's plan, it's MWRA ratepayer communities for these that are on the sewer system. And then an additional fee will be to the Cambridge and Somerville neighborhoods who will pay for those through their stormwater fees.
And before we go on to the next one, I just want to reiterate for anyone who's like, well, why is it fair that someone way upstream would pay? It's a regional water system. Everyone has been paying for years for the cleanup of the harbor. We have all benefited from that. The 17-foot diameter pipe in South Boston that has enabled Carson Beach to virtually never have sewage on it. I paid into that as a Newton ratepayer. I'm delighted. I'm thrilled. I've never been to Carson Beach. I'll probably never go to Carson Beach. I don't care. I am very happy that we all collectively invested in that. And that's what we're talking about.
And I just to underscore that point, Emily, it's a regional wastewater treatment system. So the wastewater that is coming in from other communities is taking capacity in the system, and capacity is the challenge when it's combined sewer overflows. So it's a shared system that we all share. We think it should be modernized to take all the waste for our wonderful, vibrant, growing city. That's how modern cities should work. Right now, the Charles is being used as a sewer, and the Alewife and the Mystic are being used temporary, yes, but they're essentially being used as part of that sewer system capacity. Our rivers are not sewers. Our rivers are not where we get capacity into our sewer system. Pipes, conveyance, all that fun stuff that MWRA is good at is where we get capacity. So it really is a system-wide issue.
Great, thank you. The next question we had, I don't know if Julie or Andy want to take this. What are the barriers to increase green infrastructure here? Is it the cost of land?
You want to take that, Andy? I think you started addressing
sure.
a bit. Yeah.
Well, I think I started an answer to that question in the chat by saying that both our organizations are huge advocates of green infrastructure. And I think each of us has many projects with many municipalities around our watersheds to build green stormwater infrastructure. So, it is feasible. It is increasingly common practice. The arguments in this context that the MWRA and cities give is that while excellent for some purposes, and including specifically in the case of nutrient pollution, particularly in the form of phosphorus, the green, even small scale distributed green infrastructure is a highly effective tool for curbing that kind of pollution. They argue that it's not a significant source of volume reductions in CSO events. I would say, and there are, land ownership and permitting reasons for the biggest spaces where you might be able to put green infrastructure that would help in this project. The place that we're pushing it, just to connect it with that idea of sewer separation, the idea is that if you take a combined system and create a separated system, you now have stormwater that's coming out every time it rains and aiming at Alewife Brook or at the Charles River. And that becomes both a management challenge, for sure, but also a management opportunity. That's a place where you can use the best current modern practices of green infrastructure to manage that water before it gets to the river. And so, the biggest scale green infrastructure would probably come attendant with sewer separation, and both our organizations are great advocates of that.
Green stormwater infrastructure can help most when it's intense storms. Like Andy was saying, the large storms have such a volume that the green stormwater infrastructure does fill up. But when you get combined sewer overflows from a lot of rain in a really short amount of time, because again, it's just that capacity, it just fills up too quickly. Combined sewer overflows can be helpful in that situation as well.
Before I get back to the questions in the chat, I see Beth has her hand raised. Beth, if you wanted to unmute and ask your question. Here you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think the slides are fantastic. And I did attend the recent MWRA theatrical presentation. I mean, absurdist type of thing. I think it's really important that we stop calling it CSOs. I think you're losing the general public, of which I am. I'm not a scientist. And I think we should be calling it tampons, prophylactics, and poo, so as not to lose the general public and the real import that we need to end the CSOs. The other point I think that needs to be made, and I live in Arlington, is that the CSOs, as your recent colleague mentioned, performs a function when there's a heavy precipitation event, which green infrastructure doesn't have the capacity for. So then they have the CSOs. In our instance, it's not backing up in Davis Square or somewhere in Cambridge. It's backing up in East Arlington. So I really think we need to push the fact that East Arlington is an open sewer for tampons, prophylactics, and poo for Cambridge and Somerville, or rather for the MWRA. East Arlington as an open sewer for the convenience of MWRA, who is not yet thinking outside the box. We want outside the box thinking. We want to be bold. The time to do this is now. I think, let's see. I really love your myths busted. I hope you'll share the slides with us. I think the sewage in the air, pathogens in the air, particularly for that East Arlington neighborhood, and on the other side of the Alewife Brook Parkway, that North Cambridge neighborhood, is a very important message. The whole typical year thing, it's like CSO. What does that mean? So the facts that you had were very helpful to me. Okay, I'll just keep studying. Thank you so much for your work. And I want an end to CSOs. That's what we want. And please keep pushing. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. So back to the questions in the chat. For renters who aren't usually responsible for paying home water bills, would this mean that the landlords would absorb the cost unless they decide to pass the cost on through raising tenants' rents?
I said
Yeah.
basically yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. The next question is how do we get this message out to folks besides the 38 people here? We will be sending out a follow-up email to all of those who are registered that will have templates that you can share with your community members, with your neighbors, with your family, for both the Mystic and the Charles Watershed Association on submitting public comment, as well as the slides and a recording of tonight's presentation as well. Just to help, my rule of thumb is to share with five people what you learned here tonight and ask them to share it with another 5 people to continue spreading this message.
Yeah, and I'll just pile on to that. You might not think you have a big network, but it's probably bigger than you realize, especially when who matters, like basically Eastern Massachusetts. Put it in your Facebook, put it in Nextdoor, put it in any kind of neighborhood listserv you might have. I guarantee there are people in your life who will care about this and will be really happy that you shared it. People don't really read the newspaper anymore. So those personal networks and how people get information are really valuable. As I had said earlier, we are also doing a lot of advertising, digital ads, social media, subway ads. We've got billboards coming. So we're doing a lot of that kind of thing as well. But think of your friends, your family, your neighbors who know you and trust you, and ask them to keep passing it along. We can reach a lot of people with word of mouth in addition to those traditional advertising methods.
And I'll just quickly cap that off by saying the 2 asks are submit public comment, because that's what the regulators are going to read in order to influence the final plan, but then also encourage your leaders from your local boards of health all the way up to Governor Maura Healey to weigh in on this process as well.
Yeah, for any Jim and Marjorie fans, every time the governor is on Jim and Marjorie, call in. And then thousands of people will hear this message. Like these things really do matter.
Perfect. The next question is from Sarah. Does Deer Island MWRA
I
need to
see
upgrade?
one. Where's the CSO on Muddy River?
Sorry. Where is the CSO on Muddy River is actually the next one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I can take that one. The CSO on the Muddy River is basically right by the MFA. If you know the area well, it's right by the Emerald Necklace Visitor Center, like right next to that. So if you're familiar with that site, it's right there. Like Andy had the circle on the Mystic map, showing which outfalls were part of this process and which weren't. For us, it's the vast majority that are part, for the Charles, it's the vast majority that are part of the process. It's 9 of the 10. The one that's not included is the one on the Muddy River, Boss 046, it's called. That one will have 0 improvements. 0 improvements. 0 improvements on that one. So, so what we're talking about now isn't even, it's a half job on a half job already.
Thanks, Julie. So for the next question now, does Deer Island MWRA need to upgrade their treatment facility in order to handle extra volumes of wastewater?
They would need to, yes. They reach capacity now. So they have a regular flow, operating capacity, and then they have a high flow peak capacity, where they change the treatment slightly. Not my area of expertise, but they change the treatment slightly. If they wanted to increase that peak, yes, they would have to be technological changes there or expansions there. A lot of what the earlier improvements, the harbor improvements and the earlier improvements in the Charles came from were improvements at Deer Island. Right now, my understanding is it's not necessarily just expanding the treatment plant, it's also expanding the conveyance. So it is that pipe system capacity that can really be a pinch point, is really a pinch point.
And it's like literally the pipes themselves are just not big enough to take that much water that quickly.
Great. I saw another question about asking for the slides. Like I mentioned, we'll send out a follow-up email with the slides and the recording and templates for folks for public comment. And then the next question is regarding the Mystic River plan. Is there any green stormwater infrastructure? If no, then without it, won't the water quality drop after the sewer separation? And then there was another follow-up question to that of have the planners prioritize untreated CSOs over treated in the Charles? I don't know if Andy, you want to take the first set and then maybe Julie, the second half.
Yeah, I think there is a modest amount of green infrastructure in the project area that includes sewer separation in Somerville, but it's not a very highly featured tool, let's say, and it's definitely an opportunity to improve that plan. Yeah.
Have the planners prioritize untreated CSOs over treated in the Charles. Don't like to say treated. It is undertreated, partially treated. What a treated CSO means is it's chlorinated and then it's dechlorinated. There also is some filtering just to take out some of those larger items that Beth educated us about. That's the treatment. So it's really not, it's inadequately treated, what goes in. So we don't call that treatment. It is the largest overflow in the Charles is Cottage Farm, located at Magazine Beach in Cambridge. It is by far the largest, and that has that partial treatment. So they did a, that one volume wise is actually coming down the most because it's the most to begin with, versus the other fully untreated ones.
I'll just contribute on the Mystic. The one that's on the Mystic River near Assembly is treated, but it's worth emphasizing, kind of as many folks on this call have called out, that all of the ones that are on Alewife Brook are completely untreated. And Alewife Brook is the tributary that receives the highest volume of completely untreated sewage in all of Greater Boston.
Thanks, Isaiah. The next question we had was, you guys make the highest level of control sound like a no-brainer, but clearly the MWRA does not agree. Is cost the only factor driving them to prefer less effective options?
I haven't seen any other really. That seems to be the big one.
Yeah, I think I would only add, they don't hear from the public much. So I think that they think that people think the rivers are clean enough. I think they think that you don't care.
Yeah, and the cost is always in one of these big public decision-making processes, contrasted with benefit, right? So it's really this question of where is optimal bang for the buck? Are we fully accounting the benefits of the additional cost? And our fundamental argument is that they're underplaying the environmental and public health costs and underplaying the benefits of eliminating CSOs. So a full public discussion of whether the cost is worth it has to have a robust discussion of what the benefits are. I in my comment in the chat, I just noted Emily's frequent comment, which I quote, which is that the Boston Harbor cleanup, the many projects that went into that, including building Deer Island, was super expensive. It was expensive, and literally no one no decision maker, no resident, no one in Greater Boston regrets that we made that investment. And we think that this falls into exactly the same category.
The Boston Harbor Beaches report card was published last week, and it's the first time in decades that every beach in the report card is getting over an 80%. So it's it's like real improvements.
And we just want to see those improvements in the rivers. We're all applauding.
That's great.
And we
Keep
all
going.
pay for it, and we're thrilled. But let's do that in the rivers.
We're not universally getting 80% on our river report cards.
Thank you. Another question on when will this be repaid? Nancy will be sending out a follow-up email with the recording in this, as well as we'll have another one of these presentations on June 25th from noon to 1 p.m. Feel free to share with your networks as well, for those who are unable to make it tonight. Another question from Kristen: can Andy show us the bar chart of bacteria count by MWRA outfall again and point to the bar for MWRA? MWR003, and Andy responded he is working on a longer presentation and will absolutely share this with folks once it's available. And then the next questions, there were quite a few public officials at the MWRA presentation. Do you know how they feel about the suggested presentation?
We have gotten public support from every single one of the Watertown city councilors, most of the Newton councilors, 2 of the Boston councilors would love more outreach there. So I'm not sure which public officials. I was not at that presentation. I was at my son's high school graduation. I thought I should attend that instead. Otherwise I would have been there. So we've gotten a lot. I think the Arlington folks have been very supportive. Cambridge, 100% supportive. But And we have a number of state reps and senators who've been very supportive. But having said that, you know, you can never have too much pressure. So more local officials in the greater area is important. And especially those of you in Arlington and Cambridge and Somerville, keep hammering your state reps and your state senators. There's more that they could be doing.
Great. I know there was a question. I wonder, would there be an interest in campaign to ask for MS4 permitting enforcement? I'm not sure if you thought about that.
Might we define MS4 as well?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. MS4 is the stormwater permit I was talking about. It stands for Municipal Small Separated Stormwater, Storm Sewer. I have too many S's, I think. Yeah. So that's the stormwater permit that in the Charles, all of the communities except for Boston have. I believe that's the same in the Mystic as well. And this requires certain activities to address stormwater pollution. And that is pollution that is carried to the river by stormwater runoff or rainwater runoff. I think MWRA has also been pointing to illicit connections and illicit discharges as another part of the problem. I've heard that question from a few folks, that it's all these illicit connections, it's all these illicit discharges. That means in a separated system where the sewer pipe is leaking into the stormwater pipe, accidentally got connected to the sewer pipe. Even your residents can be accidentally connected to a stormwater pipe when it should have been a sewer pipe. So it's, you know, it's a bit of a maze there in those underground pipes in an old city like Boston, even in newer cities. And these cross connections do happen, pipes do fail, and things do leak in there. Certainly, the IGDE is still a problem for sure. And it still is one that cities and towns are working on, with varying degrees of success. Sometimes these are easy to find, sometimes these are hard to find. Charles River Watershed Association did a lot of enforcement on this issue in the early 2000s. And a lot of the benefits that you see, in addition to the combined sewer overflow reductions, a lot of the water quality benefits that you see came from this exact thing, finding those illicit sewer cross connections and fixing them and getting those out. So there's always going to be more problems because infrastructure can fail. So that definitely needs to be something things that we're staying on top of. Can't really speak to EPA's enforcement situation on the MS4 issue right now. But just with respect to the combined sewer overflows, because that is with respect to the illicit discharges, that is something I've heard from folks who went to MWRA meetings, having confusion about.
Another question is, why is Somerville reluctant to address Canary Brook CSO?
Someone from MyRWA want to?
I was going to joke, so someone from Somerville Engineering like to weigh in on that.
Yeah, probably is a good question.
I think, you know, we're pursuing multiple conversations with City of Somerville, and I know that Save the Alewife Brick is as well, and we'll have occasion to ask them that exactly what their argument about feasibility there is, but there's, you know, it's some form of feasibility argument, and we'll keep pushing on that.
Thank you. And I think we have two more questions after this. And so first question is, one more ask for CRWA and MyRWA. Is there a website for the Watertown rule info I can point decision makers to for promotion and outreach efforts? Thanks.
Ari can answer that.
Ari, that's a you question.
Yeah.
I will put it in the chat, but you can visit crwa.org/CASS. Those are stormwater regulation standards recommendations that include the Watertown 100-year storm retention standard rule that we are talking about. And my info is on that website, and you can reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions and help you in any way possible in your community. And then I believe the next question is, thank you, Carly, for putting the website in the community in the chat, is what specifically can State Senator Cindy Friedman do? What should we ask for?
That is a great question. I would ask for a meeting with her in person and bring some friends, bring a group, make sure she is aware of this issue. Don't assume that she's an expert on it, because she handles a lot of issues. And I would say you'd like to have a meeting with the governor, or you would like her to meet with the governor and raise this, maybe a group of senators to meet with the governor and raise this, because right now it's being decided by the DEP that works for the governor, and the governor's EEA secretary is chair of the board of the MWRA and voted for this plan. So we need to go above her, and the only one above her is the governor. State senators are very powerful. So if she were interested in making this a priority, that's what I would do, is to take this to the governor and say, I need your commitment that we're going to get the highest level of control here.